Good afternoon, everybody. This is Wilderness Voice 71 coming back at you with another video. Today, we're going to talk about polygamy in the Bible. One of these things that is kind of taboo to talk about. A lot of Christian circles don't talk about it because and there's reasons why it becomes a quagmire. So I think the problem is in a lot of times with Christianity. And here again, I'm just someone who started reading the Bible 28 years ago, asked the Lord for wisdom and understanding, and started reading it and said, well, whatever you show me it says is what it says. I think the problem that we have a lot of times is Christians, our traditions dictate how we look at text, and not understanding. And I tell everybody, I learned this from reading Dr. Michael Heiser's, the late Dr. Michael Heiser's books, that the Bible was written for you, but not to you. The Bible was written to the first century Jew. And so to understand that, to understand anything in the Bible, we have to go back and see how the first century Jew saw it, and to get that understanding. So we look at polygamy, and one of the things is that if you ask churches today, well, can a guy have more than one wife? You're like, no, because, God made you for one wife and one man for one woman. They'll give you all these quotes. But then why was everybody in the Old Testament polygamous? Why was there so much polygamy? And why did, and then you say, well, that's not what God intended. But God also put in his law that if your brother dies and his wife doesn't have a child, you have to marry her and give her a child and raise a child up to his name, so his name would be put out in the land of Israel. So God commands that by default, if your brother died, you had to marry his wife and give her a child under your brother's name. So you, by default, you were going to be polygamist anyway, because you couldn't raise your own children. You had to raise a child up for him, so you'd have to marry someone else to have your own children. So this is really interesting, we get into this. So there's a lot of people get a little absurd about this, but you have to understand the time, and you have to understand that the construct of marriage that we follow today is Roman. Comes out of Rome. Rome promoted, prior to Christian Rome, promoted monogamy. They were one of the only cultures that were monogamous, but yet you could divorce as many women as you wanted and remarry. So by default, you were polygamist anyways. You get tired of your wife, you divorce it, and kind of like our country today. We run over 50% divorce rate in the United States. I'm not familiar with statistics in the UK or anywhere else, but it's pretty high in Western culture. So there's that. And Judaism, polygamy was widely accepted in this. So, and I'm not promoting that you should go out and be polygamist or anything like that. I'm just trying to, the whole point of me doing videos, I just take what I read and I bring it to you. A while back, a lot of my friends and that said, you should do videos and put things out there about what you know. And so that's what I do, and most everything I do is from memory, and it's what I read. And, you can not agree with it or agree with it. Debate's always healthy, and that's cool. But so we'll dive into this. So, not condoning anybody to go out and get multiple wives, but I'm not going to judge you if you do. I mean, that's your, I believe our Constitution is very clear. You have your right to pursue happiness. And in fact, in 1996, the late Justice Anton Scalia wrote that if two states of Arizona and Utah would sue the state for polygamy, they would have to allow it. Polygamy would be legal in those states because the federal government basically used coercion for those states to get their statehood. They basically said you had to outlaw bigamy in order to become a state, and that's coercion. So this is a Supreme Court Justice wrote this. So that was in 1996 he wrote this. So if those states came to them, they would have to rule in favor of polygamy. So no one's challenged those laws, but that was the prerequisite for them to become a state, to gain their statehood. But let's dive into this. So the thing is, we go back into first century culture and beyond, because we look at Jacob had 4 wives. He had Rachel and Leah, which were his contracted wives. I talked about that before. And then he had 2 concubines, which were common law wives, which were more than likely Rachel and Leah's cousins, because they come out of the same household of Laban. So you have to understand the time and the culture at that time. If you had a daughter as the father of the household, and it came time to marry her off, you wanted to marry her off to a good home. You wanted to marry her off to where your grandkids would thrive, where they would have food to eat. And so that's a lot of times they would charge a dowry. If your daughter had the tokens of her virginity, you presented her as a virgin, and she was taken care of, somewhat educated, because believe it or not, the women were in the biblical times were not just dummies who sat around or just did housework, because Proverbs 31 is very clear on what a woman is. In fact, it is almost like she would be the Tirshatha of her household, the governor of her household, because in Proverbs 31 it says she considers a piece of land and purchases it. So basically, the way the system was set up, the man worked and he brought home what he worked for. So whether he had flocks, herds, cattle, whatever, and she took what he got and then she turned him a profit. So women were a treasure. They were business people, and they were trained on how to run a household. So this was an asset to a guy. And as a father, you wanted to marry him off good, because you wanted to make sure, because keep in mind, back then, if you had a famine came through the land, you died. So the better, the wealthier the family was that they were with, the chances of them reproducing, the chances of them flourishing and surviving and living a full, good life were a lot greater. So you had to look at that aspect, and you keep in mind. And so you take, like, in Jacob's case, well, we know that Laban, who was Rachel and Leah's dad, was Jacob's mother, Rebekah's brother. And it doesn't really say in the story, maybe his father was older at the time that Abraham's servant negotiated for Rebekah as a wife for Isaac, but they knew that Abraham was wealthy because of all the gifts that were brought to pay dowry for Rebekah. So Laban knew that Abraham was very wealthy and that God had blessed him. This is why Laban, because Laban and Jacob's kind of a trickster in the Bible, but Laban was even trickier. We kind of see it runs kind of in the family. And Laban knew, since God had blessed Abraham so much, that if he had Jacob working for him, then God would bless him like Abraham was blessed. So he made Jacob work for Rachel for 7 years, and then he gives Leah, first tricks Jacob, gives Leah, well, think about it. He's like, I killed 2 birds with 1 stone. I get Jacob working for me longer for 14 years, and he multiplies my wealth. And I know that God has blessed him, so my 2 daughters will be taken care of. So it's more of a survival thing and flourishing. So that's how we see how Jacob got his 2 wives. He's kind of tricked into it because Jacob loved Rachel. And I would argue the fact that probably Leah was a better wife because Rachel was kind of a trickster too. And then they had the 2 handmaids that were given to them, which were probably cousins, and they ended up giving them to Jacob to be his wives as well. And but so we see that. So but through the Bible, when we see this, it is a lot more of a matter of survival and flourishing in a community. You think about this. They would have more wives because you take, like, just preparing a meal took all day. And you'd have some servants in that, but basically, when you look at it from the man's perspective, the head of the household, if you have a woman that has children with you, then she's got skin in the game. And it's just how they thought. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but that's just, so she's got a stake in the inheritance through her children. So you have everybody working as a collective, working to better everything. Now we see also in the case of Jacob with his 12 sons, sometimes it didn't work out that way. Sometimes it created more problems than anything. But what's interesting about this, the point of doing this video is that, polygamy was all throughout the Bible. Now a lot of Christians will say, well, in Deuteronomy 17:17, it says that kings are not supposed to multiply wives of themselves. This is more of a command against the king, also not to multiply much gold and silver. So basically, because the king that gets chosen by God has authority, is anointed, but he's supposed to be the shepherd of the people. This is why when Saul failed, God chose David, because David was a shepherd. And David would and this is where Jesus gets the term the good shepherd from. So when Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, the first century Jew would look back to David. Why? Because when David was given his testimony to Saul before going out and killing Goliath, he says that a lion and a bear tried to come in and take the sheep, and he killed him with his sling. You see, in shepherd's law, a hired servant would leave because they would be absolved of liability if a wolf or bear or a lion came in and took a sheep. They did not have any liability, but those were his father's sheep. The difference with David was those were Jesse's sheep, his father. So he put himself between the animals and killed them with the sling. So a good king was like a good shepherd. He laid down his life for his people, and that's the heart that God wanted for a king. So in Deuteronomy, when they talk about polygamy, not really. It's talking about accruing many wives for themselves, multiple wives, because why? It would turn their heart away, as we see with King Solomon. King Solomon, it turned his heart away because he married foreign women. Another no-no he was not supposed to do. And I think it has more to do with the heart of the person than the nationality. Because we see this, that he married foreign wives and turned his heart away towards other gods, but yet we have Ruth, who is a Moabitess, who's in the direct lineage of Yeshua, who is a Moabitess, but she told Naomi, my God will be your God and your people will be my people, because she made her heart right with Adonai. So that's what has more to do with it. So getting back into this, is that, so when we get in that, so some other Christians will say, well, the Apostle Paul said, you husband of one wife. That's the commandments, that's the rules for being in a pastoral position or a church office position, because you can't be focused on multiple things. Could you imagine? And I don't know how guys had 5 wives or 3 wives or 2 wives when most of us can't handle one wife. I mean, it's a job. I mean, it's a commitment. So and I'm not saying that to be in a bad way. I'm just saying that it takes a lot of responsibility and a lot of management for that. So that's why he's saying that. So the point of this is that I think the point is to understand why they did this and how this came about. Because sometimes we get too contentious on the points and we try to look to something that's not there. And today, you know what? If someone said that God called them to be polygamous and they all agreed, and you have a family's got 2 or 3 wives, that's between them and God. I mean, there's nothing explicitly in Scripture that tells them they can't do that. In fact, the constructs, as I said earlier in the video, the constructs of the marriage that we have today comes out of Roman culture, pre-Christian Roman culture. So that's where we get that tradition from. Now, I grew up Baptist, and I believe that marriage is for one man and one woman, but I don't think that it's something that it is not a doctrine that's set in stone with someone who may believe something different. I may not agree with you, but I can't sit down with the Bible and say, well, thus and so, this is why, because it's just not there. And I think if we start understanding the culture and context of Scripture it allows us to have a better understanding of Scripture. So, but anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, hit like, share, subscribe, follow, and we'll get into some more stuff, but, I think that it's important to understand these things, and it's important to have an open mind of what Scripture says, because by doing so, it allows us to see things in a better light. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. You all have a great day.